the second virtual workshop of the Green Commodities community. I think I know most of you. My name is Nicolas Petit. I'm working for the Green Commodities program as a senior commodities advisor. And as I mentioned, I'm based in Hong Kong. So as you know, some of you may know, as part of the Green Commodity community evolution in 2018, we are trying to strengthen organization and structure. And in that context, we're running a number of thematic and knowledge streams in order to take deep dives into specific topics on key issues related to the work you are doing on a day-to-day basis. So today, it's the second workshop. Some of you might have participated on the one done by Kifa on monitoring land use. And today, we're going to look specifically at national extension services and their financing. A pretty complex topic, as my friends and colleague Life will say. So that's to say the least. So let's get into that. So let's see if I can switch slide. Yeah. So in this thematic stream today is the kickoff workshop to a bit explain what we're going to talk about in that group. And basically, we are going to try to answer together the following question. How do we strengthen national extension advisory systems through multi-stakeholder processes for sustainable production? So that's what we are going to look together. And as Matthias sent in the email, we all know that extension are well recognized for contributing to productivity, growth, for improving livelihoods. And there's a lot of literature on the subject. But as I said, it's complex systems, which makes the assessment and the strengthening of those systems quite challenging. So we're going to try to learn a bit more about extension together. And we're going to also try to go through a toolkit that UNDP is trying to develop to help the work you do on a day-to-day basis. So basically, we're going to start by a quick group introduction. And then I give you some feedback from the needs assessment, learning needs assessment for those of you who've answered it. I'm going to give you a very general introduction on extension. We could have 5 webinars to talk about each component of extension, but it's going to be a general introduction. I'm going to present the initial thinking on the toolkit that we're just starting to develop. And then I'm going to ask you some feedback on that presentation and on what you think about this toolkit. And then I'm going to give you the next steps around that thematic stream. So the number of registered participants are quite different to the number of people today. I think we're only 7 today, and we have more than, I think, between 10 and 15 participants registered. So who's part of that community stream? I made a list based on the people who registers, and there's normally a range of countries. So we have Costa Rica, Peru, Ivory Coast, Liberia, Indonesia, Paraguay, Ecuador, and also some global team in Panama and Thailand. We have representatives from government, private sector, UNDP office, and platform team. And normally the commodities represented in the group are palm oil, pineapple, fisheries, soy, coffee, and cocoa, which is hopefully based on this range of actors and countries and commodities. We should have an interesting discussion in the coming weeks and months. So as we are only 7, we can do a quick introduction. If you can tell me your name, organization, if you currently engage in activities to strengthen extension, and what interests you specifically about national extension services in the context of the work you do on a day-to-day basis. So Matthias, can you ask participants one by one? I cannot see everybody on my screen in the list you have.
I will ask Jairo. Why don't you start?
No problem. Good morning or good evening or good afternoon to everyone. My name is Jairo Andrés Serna. I work in the Pineapple platform here in Costa Rica. I'm really engaged in activities related to strength extension services, mostly related to the use and control of agrochemicals and land use and conservation. We are working pretty hard in that two areas. And I'm really interested in know really fast about how to strengthen these national extension services, because as you know, most of Latin American countries has been, the extension services has been weakened by several political issues. So I want to know the way to strengthen this kind of system using the less amount of money possible.
Thank you.
Maybe we should go with John Paul.
Thank you, Matthias. My name is Jean Paul Aka, and I'm a National Commodity Advisor for Green Commodities in Ivory Coast. For me, I'm not currently engaged in the activity to strengthen extension, but I'm very interested to know what I can do in the cocoa context in Ivory Coast. So I'm very happy to be here to understand what Nicola are going to explain to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Paul. Ronald.
Hey, my name is Ronald Cumberbatch, and I am currently in Liberia, working on the Good Growth Partnership as project manager. Currently, the project is not actually working with specifically in extension with communities or with the ministry, but there's a needs assessment that's being done, and it's envisaged that going forward, we'd have to support them. And so I'm particularly interested in how that can happen, stepwise, and also what tools might be available to make that process very bespoke and specific to Liberia here. Yeah, John.
Excellent. Thank you. Life.
Yes, hello everybody. My name is Leif Peterson. Like Nicolas, I'm also a senior commodities advisor in GCP, and I also work in several countries that urgently need to strengthen their extension systems. I have been working with extension for a number of years, and I do think it's a big challenge. So I've been looking forward to this webinar, so that I can learn the solutions from Nicolas and the rest of you. So I'm very much looking forward to it. I also have a few thoughts that I might be able to contribute with.
Excellent. Your expertise is very much welcomed to find solutions together. Pascaline.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So Pascal Bonzon, UNDP Green Commodities Good Growth Partnership Project Global Project Manager. How am I engaged? I'm not engaged directly. I'm engaged through the countries in the GGP, so Liberia, where we are not directly working with extension service, but we will try to have a strategy around it. And of course, Indonesia and Paraguay, and to a certain extent, Brazil as well. What interests me? Well, I'd love to learn more about the experience of GCP and GCP countries in this field, and so I can better support the countries within GDP. And I have my own experience of supporting extension services. And actually, I'm a strong believer in non-national extension services, but rather private sector extension services, which I've worked on in Tajikistan. And I'll be happy to share some experience of that. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And we have also Karen. Are you there? Are you on mute? Karen? No. And someone just joins. Who's that? Cannot see. Rini. Hi there. Can you hear us? Indonesia is in the place. No. Also on mute. All right, so I'm gonna continue so we don't lose too much time. So we ask you all to fill a learning needs assessment. If you haven't done so yet, it would be really nice if you can do so, because that will help us base the work we're gonna do in the coming month based on your needs. But we did receive some feedback, and I'm just gonna show you very briefly what's the feedback I got. Basically, we have a mixed level of knowledge and practical experience on extension in the group. Some with strong understandings of what needs to be done and to strengthen extension, and others with more limited experience. Everybody indicated that it's a highly relevant topic. With farmer support activities in platform, like in Indonesia or in Liberia, as we discussed, but also some people are designing projects with government that include extension activities. So either a JEF team or Red Plus team, etc. The needs that I received from that survey is a bit all over the place in a nice way. We have someone wants to have information on how to work with other service providers than governments. As Pascal mentioned, we can work with the private sector, for example. Some say that we should look at the cost efficiency of extension services, how to give access to illegal smallholders, to reduce deforestation. That was the question in the context of Indonesia. Key issues around provision and access to extension services. What are the innovative models that we can look at for extension? How to foster PPP, public-private partnership, and how to ensure inclusion for different type of clients. So you can see already on the needs that the complexity of the extension services is already coming out. So I'm going to give you a very brief introduction, maximum 5-10 minutes, just to set the scene for the toolkit that I want to present just after. So, as some of you may know, and specifically the people with a lot of experience on extension, if done correctly, extension is one of the most powerful tools to break the cycle of low productivity, vulnerability, and poverty. I said if it's done correctly, on purpose. This is a colleague live here. Nice photo of him, basically showing the enormous potential for change. If you look at productivity specifically, there's a farm in Ghana on the left with 350 kilograms per hectare of cocoa, and then in a farm in Peru with 10 times more, 3,500 kilograms per hectare. So this is just to show you the potential for change on the one commodity. Basically, extension has risen and fallen on the global development agenda over the past 30, 40 years. It was really in fashion during the Green Revolution and this period in the 70s, 60s. Then it disappeared a bit, and now it's coming back on the global development agenda. There's been many philosophies and methods about how to do extension. You know, the views on what needs to be done have changed over time, and they're still very different now. For example, Pascal in the introduction said, you know, shall we work with the private sector or shall we work with the public sector? So there's very different views on what a successful extension system looks like. As you all know, or most of you know, there's a huge diversity of extension methods. You could have mass media, farmer field school, demonstrations, ICTs, etc. In terms of evolution, I made this little diagram to show you in a nutshell how extension has evolved in the past 30 years. So the first, you know, it will be like, you can see on the left will be like the traditional view of extension, and on the right, a more modern view of extension. the first thing is, who is the service provider? So in the traditional view, it was the government, public advisory services, and then in the past 20 years, 30 years, people have started looking at pluralistic extension services that includes either the private sector, but also civil society, for example. Also, the focus before was really on productivity and agricultural production specifically. And now people are looking at a broader set of services. So looking at income, market linkages, food security, health, livelihoods, etc. Looking at how to help farmers to form producer organization, for example, how to access markets, etc. So that's another big change in the way people are approaching the strengthening of extension services. Another fundamental change in extension is the technology transfer approach, which was the traditional approach, to adult learning, education, facilitation approach, where the farmers are really at the center, not only the recipients of some information, but really actively participating into the learning. And then, and that was really the paradigm shift in the 70s, 80s, you know, like it was not really meeting the farmers' needs. So it's been, and it was called the linear approach of extension. And it's been gradually replaced by what is called a system approach. I'm sad that Charlie is not with us because he loves systems. So he will be happy to know that there's a system for extension as well. So that's a bit the evolution, but however, in many countries, the linear approach that you see on the left side is still the focus of many countries, and the focus on production is still the focus. I mean, obviously this is not to say that production is not important, it's essential, but more that you need to have a more holistic system to look at extension. In terms of definition, I put it there because it's quite important, because as people have different views and different visions on how to achieve agricultural development, you have many definitions of extension or advisory services. And there's many philosophies and methods. So for the rest of the discussion today and for the group, we're going to use this definition here that is more encompassing and looking at extension at a holistic way. So it's really looking at recognizing the diversity of actors in extension, as I mentioned, public, private, and civil society. It's recognizing that you need to go beyond technology and information sharing and providing a broader support to communities, and including advice related to farm and business management and facilitation, etc. So that's the definition we're going to use, and that definition is aligned to the concept of agricultural innovation system. So some of you agronomists or who have worked in agriculture, you might know about that. What it is basically to say that the attempt to address only one component of the system is going to struggle, and you need more holistic reforms to strengthen extension services. So to give you an example, if you're looking only at training methodology, for example, or you're going to strengthen farmer field school and everything's going to be fine, it's usually not the case, because you need to look at the system as a whole. And so you need to look at technical, managerial, and institutional aspects to understand how to strengthen extension. So part of this exercise that UNDP is doing, I was responsible to do some literature review, and I found that very interesting framework out there that is called the Best Fit Framework, that has been designed by extension experts out there to analyze basically pluralistic agricultural services worldwide. And it basically asks one question. It's which forms of providing and financing agricultural services work best in each situation. And it's a very interesting framework because it presents extension as a holistic system, as I mentioned, distinguishing between the contextual factors that you might not be able to influence, sometimes like the policy environment or the production system, the climate, or etc. And then the actual extension services characteristics. So you're going to see there the capacity in terms of staff numbers, the management style, the advisory methods, etc. But it's also looking at the performance and the impact of extension systems. You know, you deliver all that for what purposes. So it's basically designed to analyze and design new extension system at national level in a comprehensive manner. And so this is the closest I found to something that relates to the work we do. But the problem to translate this into a reality is that, as we mentioned, it's complex systems. There's a lot of interaction among each components. One thing that I always say is that we're looking at heterogeneous group. So it doesn't mean anything to say a farmer or the government or private sector, because each of those groups are very diverse. Governments, you have the Ministry of Land that has different interests than the Ministry of Agriculture that has different interests than the Ministry of Environment, as you all know as practitioners. And the private sector have very different objectives based on what they are trying to achieve. One thing that we think is also essential is the power relationship into that entire system, which is obviously very difficult to assess, but it's completely part of the system. And as I mentioned, different service providers have different objectives. But also one thing that is interesting is that most aspects of extension, philosophies and methods, are all still largely under debate in 2018. You know, experts organization on extension are still debating about what's the best approach to follow, and there's many ideological discussion. One organization tried to translate that framework that I showed you, the best fit framework here, into the reality of different national government to look at how to operationalize that. And I found it quite interesting because it's showing some of the key challenges that you can see today in extension. So the countries tested were Bangladesh, Ethiopia, Honduras, Liberia, for Ronald, Malawi, Nigeria, and Guinea. And the key findings are presented here in the slide. So, for example, they find that most national extension services are using pluralism. So that means it's not only the government, it's going to be the public sector and the private sector, but coordination usually can be significantly improved between those actors. Also, they found that the linkages between research, extension, education, and other actors usually is very weak. A fundamental problem of extension is budgeting and financing. And what they find out in those 7 countries is that the budgeting and planning for the sustainability of extension systems is extremely limited. And that's a situation that you're going to find in most countries. And I'm sure the people in this discussion group will agree with that. Extension staff have usually very few performance incentives to deliver a good job. The training delivered to those staff is very technical and textbook based, with limited practical experience. There's traditional approach being still used, but very few ICT initiatives, you know, information and communication technologies. And when they exist, like, you know, using mobile phone or whatever, they're usually very scattered and pilot level. And they also focus on delivery of information rather than the capacity strengthening or the performance monitoring of extension. There's a lack of access, specifically for female farmers, to a number of finance and inputs. And there's also a problem of inclusion, that many groups are not directly connected to those extension services, you know, landless farmers, women, youth, or pastoralist people, for example. So this is just using a study that has been done to give you an introduction to the key challenge faced by extension systems. We can also, in our own context, add some challenges, is that usually sustainability is not adequately included in the mainstream curriculum. And we've been working on that with LIFE, for example, in Ghana on cocoa, is how do you ensure that sustainable cocoa is included in the national curriculum. And another challenge is that reforms, you know, there's been a lot of reforms as part of structural adjustment in the 80s, about, pushed by the World Bank and the IMF, etc., saying you want to have more private sector or you want to have other things, but often reforms have been pushing for blueprints on extension, and it's been not sufficiently taken into account the local context. So it's very important when you think about strengthening national extension that you define locally tailored solution. So that's a bit a very, very brief introduction on extension, and I'm going to pause in a minute to see if there's any question at this stage. But obviously, the space here is difficult to go into details in all those aspects. It's just to set the scene for the toolkit. So you might wonder why UNDP Green Commodities program is interested in that. So a mission is to improve the national economic and social environment performance of commodity sectors in order to improve rural livelihoods, mitigate climate change, and protect important forests and ecosystems. And as part of the strategy, we define 4 key outcomes, and one of those outcomes is improving national and subnational extension systems. So from a GCP perspective, strengthening extension services is definitely a priority. And we were sitting in Oslo a few months ago with Leif and Pascal to develop a theory of change, and we included extension, of course, in that theory of change. And so here you can see, for example, what matters the most in a theory of change for us. The key outcome is that the actors, strengthen, finance, and capacitate and coordinate the implementation of extension services. And the word coordinate here is fundamental. We're looking at lead agencies to define innovative and scalable financial model. As financing is one of the main constraints of extension systems, we need to define solutions for financing. We're also looking at government including best environmental practices in the national curricula, as I mentioned. We're looking at government to develop national extension strategies collaboratively. And here I insist on that word again, collaboratively, because the entire toolkit concept that I'm going to present is based on that idea of working together on defining the solutions. And also we're saying that key actors need to strengthen farming or fishing, because we work also in the fishery sector, organization as a fundamental aspect for the delivery of extension services. So that's a very brief introduction, and it's also explaining why GCP is looking at that. So this thematic stream is really an opportunity for us to think about finding solutions to strengthen extension systems together. So I'm really happy that there's a range of expertise in here. And maybe let me, before I go into the toolkit, pause here a minute to see if there's any questions or clarification at this stage from you. Anyone has a question? No, it's all clear, crystal clear? Okay. So bear with me. Any question, you sure? All right, so on the basis of that theory of change, we start discussing internally, what can we do on extension? And that's a complex question. Because as I mentioned at the beginning, a lot is being done. There's a lot of expert organization. And if you start looking in the literature, how to strengthen extension services, you're going to literally find hundreds and hundreds of reports. So how does it fit within our own needs as UNDP? So we start thinking about developing a toolkit to do 2 things: to assess and strengthen extension services. This is really the initial stage of the thinking. So what I'm going to present here is really in a draft form. There's complete flexibility to improve, and there's even space to change the concept. So feel really free in the discussion afterwards to bring new ideas and, say what you think about that toolkit. One really important thing for me when I was developing that draft was to be sure that we are not reinventing the wheel, and developing something that has not been done previously, and that really fulfill a need for us. So So you can see the presentation. I'm going to present you the objectives, the audience, the focus of what we want to do, an overview of the toolkits, presenting the different tools and the timelines. That's basically what we're going to do. And then I'm going to ask for you feedback specifically. So when I was developing the toolkits, there was a number of principles that I was thinking with Andrew as well that we should take into account. So one, we want to develop something that is simple despite the complex system, that is action oriented. You know, the entire green commodity community should be action oriented. It should be focusing on the needs of practitioners, and it should be based on collaborative work. And how are you going to strengthen collaboration? So the objective is to develop for a targeted audience of practitioners a simple, easy to use, action-oriented toolkits in order to facilitate access to information and know-how on national extension systems key elements. It's also to stimulate debates within existing multi-stakeholder processes in order to support the elaboration of innovative extension systems and policy recommendation. It's also to, and that's very important, to jointly diagnose problems, exploring opportunities, and investigating solutions. So I'm going to come back to that. And the word jointly is very important, as I'm going to keep repeating. And it's also to support the design and implementation of GCP, GEF, or RED+ projects that will include activities related to extension. So that's draft objectives about what we want to do. That gives you already an idea of the focus of what we're looking at. In terms of audience, we're looking at obviously UNDP, the GCP, GEF, RED+ advisor. We're looking at country officers, project team with responsibility over sustainable commodity production, and national platform team. We're looking also, of course, in the GCC, but also about national commodity platform participants for those countries with a platform. For example, you have technical working groups that can be focused on strengthening farmer support systems, like in Indonesia. I don't know in Costa Rica what is the different working groups that you had in the past. But also the audience will be obviously the governance structures involved in extension and the service providers and producers. So based on the presentation I did before, the focus, and that's very important because we cannot do it all, is looking at extension at a holistic level. We're looking at pluralistic system. So we're thinking that, you know, each organization has a comparative advantage. We're not saying private sector is better than public sector or public sector is better than the other. In many countries, there is a different comparative advantage for the public, the private, and the community-based organization or civil society. What matters is ensuring the adequate coordination between the actors. We're looking at sustainable commodity production. That's very important. So focusing on sustainability and even potentially giving a highlight on conserving forests in forest frontiers. Like, for example, the situation in Indonesia, the situation in Ivory Coast, in Ghana, in Peru, etc. And obviously, we want to empower farmers in decision-making and ensuring that service providers are accountable to farmers. So that's what we are trying to achieve. It's always good to put a disclaimer. And as I mentioned, there's no blueprints for extension. So we are not trying to develop a blueprint. We are trying to develop solutions to help practitioners that they can then take forward at country level. It's very complex. And a lot of the elements in that framework are beyond the sphere of influence of GCP or the sphere of influence of private sector or other actors. So we have to recognize that, you know, the political economy, the agroecological conditions, etc. So we have to be aware that we cannot do it all. We really want to build on existing work. So that toolkit should not be seen in isolation from what is being done by other expert organizations. And it's really not about looking at the best methodologies to train farmers. There is ample technical, scientific literature on the subject. There's literally thousands of of article on that, but it's rather a way to provide you with recommendation on how to strengthen the system as a whole. So UNEP, the entry point is the government. So how do we work at national level with the government to on extension? So that's a bit what we are looking at. Sorry, there's quite a lot of information from my side today to kick off the call, but I'm just going to present you the toolkits briefly, and then we're going to go directly into some discussion. So what is being proposed, again, really in the draft form, is a toolkit with 5 elements. An analytical framework, and I'm going to present each in turn. A joint diagnosis and decision tool. A training program, best practices library, and guidance notes. And those 5 elements are completely interconnected. So basically on the literature review, we start developing an analytical framework, which is going to be the central piece for that toolkit. It's basically presenting you the key elements that you need to look at if you want to strengthen national extension services. So we've tried to develop that in a simple form. This is building on previous work done by experts as the best fit framework and others, but tailored to our needs and to a targeted audience. So basically, we're saying that if you want to look at extension, you need to look at 5 components and 15 elements. So each element has 3 components, if you want. So you need to look at the policy environment, the organizational and management capacity, advisory methods, financing, and M&E and learning. And each of these has, sub-elements or components that have relevance if you want to strengthen extension. So, if you start discussing about strengthening extension, some people say, okay, let's focus on the delivery or let's focus on financing. What we are saying is you need to look holistically at these 15 elements if you want to have a good go at strengthening national extension systems. So I'm not going to go and presenting each of them in turn. We have a draft on that, and I can share with you. So basically, the idea is to ensure that everything is discussed and not only one piece. And it's really to stimulate a discussion. So for example, if you have a technical working group on farmer support systems in Liberia, okay, what are we going to do to strengthen extension systems? People are going to start talking, and we're going to go into a very detailed technical level because it's highly technical extension. By having that tool or that framework is to direct the discussion in a space that is more holistic. That's basically what you are trying to do. And compared to the baseline today, which we don't have that, we're bringing some information on key elements. So that's the analytical framework. The detail of it, basically, if you take on the policy environment, for example, you're going to have 3 elements. We're saying you need to look at the vision, the diversity of service providers, and the partnerships and linkages. And if you take the vision alone, sorry, it's getting a bit detailed. We have a number of strategic questions to look at when we, by what we mean by vision. So for example, do you have a policy, vision, or legislation for extension? Basic question. What's the level of buy-in of the stakeholders into that vision? Do you have a shared vision? Does the private sector and the public sector at country level share the same views about how extension services should be done? What's the political will from the government? What's the linkages with agricultural policy, etc.? What are the competing priorities? For example, the Ministry of Agriculture needs to compete with other ministries with, in the context of very limited money. If you take the context of Liberia, for example, what are the competing priorities? And what are the views of extension? Does the country think it should be only productivity or a broader set of services? Should it be more demand-driven or farmer-driven, etc.? So this is just to give you an example how the framework is then more detailed with a list of strategic questions. Here you can see other examples. I'm not going to go into detail here because we don't have time, but what are the questions on training levels, and skills and experience. Is the training adequate? What's the hiring process for extension, etc., etc. You have the same for advisory methods. Sorry, I'm going a bit fast here because I want to be sure we have time for a good discussion. But delivery, for example, which is always a topic that interests a lot of people. What type of training is being done? What is the frequency? Is it top-down or bottom-up? What's the number of clients? Do you have an integration of teams in your training? Is there a coordination between different delivery partners? Is it fit for purpose, etc.? Same on financing and same on M&E and learning. So for example, on M&E and learning, you're looking at farm level. What's the uptake and adoption by farmers on extension? Do you have a change of attitudes, knowledge, behavior, etc.? So as you can see, it's a quite extensive, holistic framework that is present here, but not necessarily complex, because there's very clearly 15 elements and a list of questions behind that. The question is, how do you translate that into something that is action-oriented, that practitioners can use on a day-to-day basis? So, and that's also a key element of that toolkit is we looked at developing a joint diagnosis and decision tool. So if you look at institutional analysis to strengthen national extension systems, there are a lot of these. Again, if you look on Google and you say how to strengthen extension in Liberia, you're going to find lots of reports on Indonesia, on Ethiopia, etc. But those analyses are usually conducted by a consultant or by a team of experts and consultants on extension. And they're going to do a range of qualitative and quantitative research. They might do a survey, key informant interviews, literature reviews, evaluation, case studies, etc. They can do rapid or in-depth analysis, and they can then present it in a workshop or a webinar or seminar, etc. But still, the assessment is not conducted jointly. It's done by an expert. And so we were thinking there's really a gap there about, in the context of intra-coordination that GCP is doing and inter-coordination, is there a way to develop a tool that can be used in the multi-stakeholder dialogue that we conduct, in the platform on pineapple in Costa Rica, in the platform in Liberia, in the platform in Indonesia? Can we use that as a tool? And we really have a unique opportunity in the National Commodity Platform to do that. So for example, that tool can be used to support discussion, as I mentioned, in technical working groups on farmer support system. If you don't have a platform, like in Ivory Coast or Ghana, you can still use that tool and set up a specific working group on extension, for example, and UNDP take the lead on supporting that discussion at national level, where you ensure that all the actors are collaboratively designing that. So as I said, the thinking on that is very new. So it's very much in draft form and it's not yet developed. The tool is not developed, but basically we think that you could have three elements in that tool. One is the diagnosis, what's the current status of extension. Second is the decision, how to have all the actors taking decision about what needs to be changed, and then also the assessment of progress, the monitoring about your performance. So this is just an example here. If I go back to the vision on extension that I mentioned previously, the idea is to do a very simple qualitative exercise that at time can be subjective but useful, because there's a lot of quantitative survey out there. So for example, on the vision, you will have something that say, do you have a policy or vision for extension? The answer is no. Under development, yes, but needs improvement. Yes, it's satisfactory. And then you can put your comments there. What's the level of buy-in into your vision? It's low, medium, high. So the tool will be quite qualitative, but it's really to support, as I mentioned, a discussion about country-specific issues or optimal numbers, what should be the staff numbers, the budget levels, etc., in a very simple form. And the interesting thing is that the tool can also capture the the different views and debate on extension. Because obviously, if you're going to ask the government what's the level of buy-in to your vision, they're going to say, well, it's really high. Everybody's supportive of my extension policy. But then the private sector might say, well, actually, that vision is not really supported by us, as I mentioned previously. So the idea will be that the tool can help you capture those different views and then stimulate a discussion about why the views are different. So that's a bit the idea that we want to develop. And the decision then will be based on that diagnosis. After having filled that tool, then the group will have other meetings to define jointly the solutions and agree on the reforms that are needed, etc. So you really set up a detailed working group looking at those issues. And this is complementing all the other experts working on extension at the national level. The assessment of progress, for example, is that you could come back every year in your meeting and then see if things have progressed. So your tool can be a scorecard, for example. You know, like when you answer, what's the level of buy-in in your vision? You know, you can say 0, 1, or 2 points, and then after 1 year, you come back, you bring the same stakeholders, and you say, you know, have we changed a behavior? Have we changed a mindset? And how are we progressing there? So that's a bit the idea of these tools. It's not yet fully developed. I hope it's not too complex for you to understand the direction. Today is just to show you the direction it's going and the concept. And then I'm going to ask you if you think that's relevant. I'm not going to talk too much about the other tool, but just to say that, you know, a lot of time we have questions about what needs to be done on extension. And also a lot of the time people think that nothing is being done, but there's so much work out there. So, for example, there's this Global Good Practice Initiative that is done by the Global Forum on Rural Advisory Services, and they've developed good practice for what's innovative financing for extension, what's private sector provision for extension, et cetera, et cetera. So all this is already out there. You know, it's how do you make that available in a format that can be used. And this is a public good, you know, so everybody can access to that. So, you know, we can share with platform, those kind of things, etc. So that's a bit the idea. I'm almost done. There's 2 slides left. So in terms of design, we're going to have a consultation now from July to October. There's going to be a GCP peer review with colleagues, and Life is going to be a key there among other people. We're going to check with country office the relevance of that tool. The thematic stream today and later is a unique opportunity to get your feedback. And I'm also going to contact expert organizations like FAO, GIZ, IFPRI, this Global Forum on Advisory Services. So the tool, the diagnosis tool that I just mentioned, we need to develop it in Q3 and finalize the toolkit in Q4 so that at the Good Growth Conference, where I hope you're all going to be in February 2019 in Peru, we're going to present the final documents. And then next year, we're going to roll out a training program and training methodology on that if there's a need. So that's basically it. Sorry, I've been a bit long. So the idea of the discussion is really to get just your initial reaction on the concept. Is it relevant for the work you're doing in Indonesia, in Liberia, in Costa Rica, in Peru, in Ecuador? Was it clear, or you didn't understand anything about it? You don't know where it's going? Is it targeted enough, or is it too ambitious, not enough ambitious? So please feel free to give your initial reaction. Do you have any key recommendation on the design, where we should go and what we should do? And also, do you have any experts you would like to recommend to be part of that consultation? So you don't need to answer all those questions. Just feel really relaxed and comfortable in terms of asking questions and just providing you your initial feedback. Matthias is going to take notes of that, and also the webinar is recorded. So yeah, let's start. Any volunteer?
Pascal, I'm gonna have to go in 5 minutes, so probably is it okay if I start?
Yes, please.
So it's super relevant. So thank you very much, Nicola. I mean, it's very, very relevant, and it's going to be very useful. I'm actually asking myself some questions in terms of timeline for the GGP, because as you know, in our GGP countries, we have to develop in all the countries some strategies for support, for farmer support systems, and pretty much all of them are kicking in next year. So that's good timing. I think we ought to use this tool as a way, you know, to feed into the strategy development, I think, and we need to think about how we use this tool exactly, you know, the process steps to then get us to the strategy. Where I'm wondering about is the needs assessments, which are slotted very much for this year in all of those countries. I'm wondering to what extent, you know, we need to tailor those needs assessments to collect data that will be useful then for this tool. So this is a question not to be answered right now, but this is a question for you to keep in mind and to help us, because we have not started, well, we have in Indonesia, but in the other countries we have not really started with these needs assessments properly. Yeah. So if you can help us in the design of this needs assessment to make them as relevant and as linked then to the following process steps of developing the strategy using the toolkit. So that's my views for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Pascal. And we can definitely work together on this needs assessment. You can use, for example, the analytical framework, because that's telling you the key elements that needs to consider in a farmer support needs assessment. So that's even if it's not ready, the toolkit fully, you can still use some elements of it that might be already available. Thank you for your feedback, Pascal. Anyone else volunteering?
Nicolas, Jairo.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. I think the tool is simple, is easy to understand the whole concept, and I think it's going to be really useful. I have some reactions. One is related with the gender issue. Here in Costa Rica, we have a strong, we are strongly encouraged to use the gender glasses to see all the processes. So I think it's really important take care of that. Then we're gonna have the chance to see as a pluralistic way, you know, but it's important to see always the gender issue. I think is quite relevant, more in our countries, in Latin America, or Africa, or Asia. The other thing is, when we talk about producers, I think it's really important to have clear the differences that we have between producers, you know, because it's a single word, but there we have, for example, in Paraguay, we have soy producers, but they are also corn and other products that they produce a lot. So it's important to see that difference. And the other thing, talking about the producers, is the scale, you know. Here in Costa Rica, we have most of our production, talking about most of the producers, they are smallholders, you know. So I think there is differences between them. So it is good to see when we talk about producers to try to capture all the diversity that we have implicit in that word. The other thing, and I think it's really important to have clear, is the role of the buyers, you know, because I think if we see the whole life cycle of these commodities, we're going to see that a lot of the changes are driven by the buyers. So I think it's important to have clear a role for them in all this process. And another thing I think is really important is have clear that we have different moments during the life cycle of a platform. So it's interesting to see that this tool, I see in this way, you can use it during the dialogue stage, but also during the implementation stage. For example, for us, I think it's going to be really useful because we have a clear action saying about the need of improve all the technology transference between the producers. So I think it's going to be really useful for us in this moment also, during the implementation of some of the action. And when we talk about the review, I know you take care of that. For me, it's important always take care of the issues inland and also the in the ocean, because as you know, we are working with land commodities, but also with fisheries. So I think it's really important to invite experts related with fisheries and also related with production inland. And also, I know you take care, because we are people from several parts of the world, is also take care of the participation of the professionals that we have in Latin America and in Asia and in Africa also, just to capture in the tool the difference that we have between the different cultures that we see in our GCP. And thank you very much. I think the tool is going to be really, really useful.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Very, very good points on all those things that I captured, and we will look at including that in this analytical framework in detail. Thank you so much. Very useful. Anyone else?
Yeah, I have first a question. Was this the first out of a series of 2 webinars, or is this it?
Sorry, is it a series of 2 webinars?
Yeah. Do you? Is there a follow-up? I can't remember in the plan if there's a second one.
That's actually the next slide. We have the next virtual workshop on the 6th of August.
Right.
That is planned, where we're gonna bring some experts to present on key topics, and also we're gonna present the draft diagnostic solution tool that is going to be developed before that. And
yeah. Okay, I'm asking because I think what we've seen today is great. It is focused more on kind of what should happen, what ideally should happen, and I think we also need to focus a lot on what can happen in our imperfect world with all the barriers that we are facing. And a number of things came to mind, during the presentation. I'm just thinking about the heterogeneity of, is that the word? Of the different efforts out there, from projects and to exporters or traders, giving some technical assistance, but kind of light and maybe focused on certification, but hugely inadequate in terms of what really should happen on farms. And also, what should happen on farms is very often needs like in expensive investments and finance. And governments many countries almost completely absent. So what's really possible to achieve in those environments where, I just really almost can't understand it myself, what should happen, what can happen. So I think it would be great to have more discussion on that.
Okay, so I can see if I can bring some expertise around that. And
yeah,
I think go ahead. Yeah.
No. I mean, a strong believer in a hybrid system, and maybe I think it's the only way forward. And that also means that we need to embrace let's say what each actor can contribute with. And accept that we will not have one uniform system that just, like you said, back in the 60s or 70s, when the governments heavily funded that kind of activity. That's not going to happen anymore. And so what can we do we know that there's just a limit to what a buyer can invest in each farm when they only produce, let's say, 1 ton of cocoa or coffee or whatever. So it's like a limited investment they can do on each farm. So how do we deal with that? And that's it. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think you're completely right. And the idea of the tool so far is that because you don't want to develop a blueprint, if you have that discussion happening at national level, you can define better, compared to perfection, what can be done in the reality of that particular country. Because, when you look at extension, you can start looking at, what's the optimal staff numbers per farmers, and you're going to say, well, you need, in that country, it's 1,000 farmers for one extensionist, and the ideal number will be 100 or whatever the number is. That doesn't mean anything if you're not in the reality of that country in terms of budget, in terms of, what is feasible. And I think that's the aim of the tool, is that instead of us saying, what's the optimal number, people really go in detail into what can be achieved at national level in their own reality. And so we're going to make sure that this is well captured in the documents. Thank you, Leif. Any other initial reaction?
Yeah, thanks so much. Just very briefly, I thought that it was a nice presentation and it was informative. I was particularly interested in the analytical framework that you put forward. The fact that you already recognized that there are different approaches to it. It can't only just be the national level just leading it. I was wondering, how do we manage rolling it out and supporting both at a landscape or a sort of a decentralized approach, finding out how you make how you manage the leadership aspect of it, and how do you manage for accountability. Also looking at issues of, let's say, vulnerability, because as our colleague pointed out earlier, there are various categories of farmers and players along the way, and people are able to manage different things. So I spoke specifically about that, particularly with relevance to what happens in this country here, Liberia. So thought I would flag that in case it was useful and we were thinking along those lines at all. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I think all those questions on accountability and leadership and decentralization again is I suppose if you discuss as a group with a reference point, in the analytical framework, you're going to have those elements. You're going to have the accountability for farmers to be sure that farmers can exercise voice. You're going to be talking about leadership. You're going to be talking about the capacity of each service provider. So those discussions happen in that multi-stakeholder dialogue, and the rolling out of that is really the next step. I don't think we're saying that with this tool you're going to have necessarily new national extension strategies developed at country level, but you will have a much better understanding of what needs to be done. And then, this is after being taken by a number of partners. So yeah, that's a bit how I see it at the moment. But thank you for this comment. Anything else? Reaction? What did I didn't hear? Rini, Jean-Paul,
yes, like all I would like to thank you for the work, and I think it is a good approach to improve extension. I don't have any question, but I think in the context of agriculture, we can see two things. The first is the possibility of improve a national extension service for agricultural commodities. Here we have one organization, another, which is a national extension service. But I think for this point, you have a possibility to to do the need assessment and see how we can do to improve it. The second, what I think is the best, is a good opportunity for us, for GCP, is for forest restoration activity. There are no extension service for this, and when you see the objective of government to restore forests, we have a possibility to establishment an extension service will be the key to achieve the goal. And I think GCP with these methodologies can play a good role on this. So that is my general point, and thank you and congratulations.
Thank you, Jean-Paul. That's very, very useful actually, because now you can include that in any fundraising proposal that we have in Ivory Coast to do the extension services for forest restoration. But that's a very good point. I think that's, I didn't look at that angle, and we can discuss that further. Thank you, very useful. Okay, anyone else wants to provide some feedback or reaction? Hello? No more? Okay. So we are coming to an end of the webinar. Basically related to live question, what are the next steps for the thematic stream specifically? So we're gonna have the next workshop on the 6th of August. That's the plan. I had initial discussion with some experts on extension to come and present on key topics. We haven't decided the topic yet, so if you have any recommendation, feel free to send me. You know, do you want to learn more about financing? Do you want to learn more about, you know, what it is that you have in this analytical framework, what it is that you are most interested in? We're going to present the draft diagnostics and solution tool, so you're going to have more information about how it's going to work in reality, and is it really simple and action-oriented enough. And then in terms of interactions between us, we're going to put, like for the webinar from Kifa, some resources in a dedicated folder, so you can see, for example, some best practices. If you want to have any information related to your country on a specific topic, just ask me. There's quite a lot of reports on my computer at the moment. Please do send further ideas and recommendations for the toolkit design. For the country office that are going to be part of the consultation, I'm going to be in touch with you directly. Live, I'm going to be sharing more information with you also, so that you can be my peer reviewer. And please do ask specific questions you have on extension, and then that's how we can interact in the coming 2 months. And then I will explain in the next webinar what we're going to do from August to the Good Growth Conference. So thank you, everyone. It's been a really nice, very good feedback that I'm going to take forward. It's 10:15 here, so it's time for sleep for me. I wish you all a great day if it's the morning, and a nice afternoon, nice day, and see you all soon, very soon.
Thank you, Nicola.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Good. Thanks.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Mm-hmm.